Well, hey folks, it's your old pal, King Waspinator. Welcome back to Total Party Skills. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. Continuing on from the video I did yesterday about halflings and elves and how to portray them as NPCs and as, like background characters for your D&D campaigns to help establish some sense of normality and reality in the environment that you're creating for your players to interact with. Today we're going to talk about the other two of the core D&D races from the Player's Handbook. The working class of D&D, which would be the humans and the dwarves. Now, if your setting has any sort of integrated economy where there's regular trade between the various races / species of your world, and or you also like have actual integrated civilizations where there's a human king in like all the various races, humans and the others that are allied with them all live under the same power structure. Dwarves and humans are going to be your main source for both agricultural and manufactured goods. They should be fairly common sights. They're NPCs that you need to have featured prominently in city and other civilized settings. They're going to be the people hauling equipment. They're going to be the people managing merchant caravans. They're going to be the people running shops. They're going to be the people working in blacksmiths, wood carvers, the whole shebang. Whereas most of the other races in D&D, you might get some specific artisanal goods from them, specialty items, unique exotic things and whatnot. The basic stuff that all player characters need to survive and all the NPCs in the game need to survive, just the basic needs of clothing, shelter, tools, food, all of that are all going to come from your dwarves and your humans. I guess we'll start a bit with dwarves. Things I like to do with dwarves to try to give them a little bit of flavor so that they're not just, humans that have been mushed. I like to, instead of giving them the exact same kind of king thane structure that humans have, I tend to run dwarves as if they're all living under a corporate guild structure. A frequent thing I use in my own homebrew stuff is the idea of a dwarves guild, where basically all the dwarves in the world are all automatically born into membership in this guild, and the dwarves guild manages all dwarven services and aspects of life, even up to and including you'll have a guild church for the dwarf gods kind of a thing. Guild libraries where you can actively pay for magic training, and also like because these are guild services, people can use and buy stuff and gain learning from the dwarves guild even if they're not dwarves. But only dwarves are automatically members, optionally gnomes as well, although gnomes should be a little standoffish towards actually ever acknowledging or taking advantage of the benefits of being automatically grandfathered into being members of the Dwarves Guild. I will tend to like have the Dwarven kingdoms be something that have been like lost in history, like 1,000+ years ago. For some mysterious reason, all the Dwarven kings and all the Dwarven kingdoms sealed their gates, and now like all the ancient underground cities that were once were back in the ages when only elves and dwarves were in the world. They're all, sealed off behind massive stone doors that are magically sealed, and no one's opened them in forever. This is how you explain where Duergar came from, and because basically the idea is that like the dwarves had caught wind of some sort of terrible invasion of the Underdark, and so in order to be able to protect the surface, they sealed their cities down to make sure that the paths that those cities controlled into the Underdark wouldn't allow things to spill up onto the surface and stuff. Dark elves, illithids, the whole shebang. And the dwarves that are left on the surface are mostly going to be, hill dwarves. The average dwarf that's out there in the setting, NPC-wise, it will be a hill dwarf. And the mountain dwarves are kind of like a small minority left who typically are members of the more prominent like household clans. If you do give them any kind of like noble lineages, those would be your mountain dwarves. They're the rich, important families embedded in a larger hill dwarf society. And here and there, you'll find small little younger dwarf holds and freeholds in some hills or in the woods or something for lumbering or surface mining, but they've never been able to really quite recapture, you know, the glories of old with the great big massive underground constructions and cavernous cities and all that kind of stuff. And so yeah, you know, giving them this kind of like mysterious, they're a refugee on the surface, but not because they were forced out of their dwarf holes, but it's because, you know, like they did it for some forgotten noble purpose, and that, you know, they don't operate like, you know, you got King Dwarf, Queen Dwarf, Baron Dwarf, Knight Dwarf. You know, you should try to not be too repetitive with how all your various racial societies work in your setting. If they're all basically just using the exact same imprint, then it also falls into the thing of like, well, are these really elves if they're using the exact same form of government as your humans, or are they just humans with pointy ears, kind of a thing? So, you know, if you're running your human on some sort of medieval you know, pattern, regardless of whether it's European, Middle Eastern, you know, Central American or East Asian, you know, medieval type society, you know, they still basically all follow the same hierarchy, and so you don't really want your dwarves to be doing that too. And so, you know, making them a little kind of odd touch of ultra modern, you know, where, you know, they're really concerned about having to have lawyers and contracts and business plans, and they, you know, the dwarf society is basically run by a board of directors, however they decide to kill or call themselves. Humans, as I've kind of been saying, like, you know, if you're running a fantasy game, you're going for probably like some sort of Middle Ages to late Dark Ages kind of a vibe with them, and you know, unless you're going back to like Neolithic type style settings, there's really only so far you can push what you're doing with your human cultures in terms of, you know, like what kind of style governments and societies they have, where, you know, like the further you get towards steampunk, the more it stops being fantasy and it starts becoming science fiction. So basically, you know, your other like alternative to you know, Middle Ages type stuff would be, you know, classical Bronze Age era, and other than that, you're kind of getting outside of what, you know, the core, you know, fantasy genre is. But most people default to kind of like a vague, you know, Middle Ages Europe, Middle East kind of thing going on with their settings. So, you know, you have your king or your queen, sometimes an emperor, sometimes, you know, the land that you're dealing with could be a part of a larger empire that the politics of which you're far removed from. So, you know, the big leader of the land is a duke. You want to ask questions of how integrated the allied races are into the human society in your setting. You know, are they separate but equal out there in the forest with their own equivalent societies, or with just engaging in a little bit of trade at the edges, or do they all acknowledge a greater common law, and, or, you know, some races have had to at some point in the past submit themselves to being ruled over by humans, kind of a thing, or vice versa for that matter. You know, you can always do something interesting like, you know, talk a lot throughout the campaign about the king or the queen or the emperor, and don't really describe them that much. The player characters and the players just kind of like assume that, you know, they're indicative of the ruling, you know, race of the land they're in, and then when they finally meet him, it turns out to be a beholder or a dragon or something more exotic. You know, little twists like that can be fun, but you know, humans are your backbone of most settings, unless you're pulling them out entirely. You know, they're your primary agricultural race. Halflings also engage in a lot of agriculture, but humans, just by virtue of their, you know, greater size and strength, can produce more faster for everyone. It's probably like a large chunk of how they're able to, you know, engage in any kind of economic trade with the other species of your setting. Because they will typically be in control of more of the arable land and actually be using it. You know, like a tribe of orcs might control the high steppe plains, but, you know, they don't have the patience to like be actively farming it and developing the land and creating canals and all that kind of stuff for irrigation. Whereas, you know, humans are provably the species that does that kind of stuff, and so yeah, like humans and dwarves are kind of like, you know, they're going to be your bureaucrats, they're going to be your average laborer. Typically, you probably have the humans being like the bottom level peasantry, type roles, whereas dwarves, even dwarves who aren't mountain dwarves, will typically be slotted a little bit higher in the hierarchy, at least in the middle ranges, up until you get to the top of the human society, and then suddenly it's human noble families up at the top. So in a way, dwarves are kind of more like, could kind of serve like the middle class, the middle merchant, industrial specialist class, and humans kind of would sandwich them at the top and the bottom, with halflings kind of mingled mostly down at the bottom too amongst the peasantry. And then elves just kind of being off doing their own thing. That's your 4 core races and how I like to present them, at least in the most vaguest of terms. So, I guess leave some thoughts below in the comment section. Hit like and subscribe. I'll probably tackle maybe tieflings and dragonborn next time, or maybe I'll do a double dive on the half races, like, the half orcs and the half elves. I'm not sure yet. We'll see what I'm feeling like tomorrow morning. Until next time, do yourself a favor. I mean, I'm serious. Like, look me in the eye right now. Take this into heart. It's the most heartfelt advice I can give you today. And that is to stay waspinated.